Hey, it's Rick here, and I'm going to give you a full-on rundown of the LG 27GP950B in this video. I've been using this now, according to the monitor, for about 30 hours of use. So I've seen a lot of the questions that have come through. I'm going to try to answer those here. Take a look at the side of the box. You can also look in the description of the video for more on this monitor. Couple of disclaimers. So first off, as I film this, I want you to know that anything that you see as far as wavy lines on some of the screens that I've grabbed, that's from the camera. If you get it too close to the monitor, it's sometimes going to do that. So keep that in mind. The monitor is actually pretty crystal clear. The other thing is IPS glow and backlight bleed. That is really enhanced by a video camera. So what you see, I would say, kind of cut that back by about 60% to 70%, and you'll get an idea of what it truly looks like. So what is that? That ring of light is what happens when you first turn on the monitor. And I have not figured out a way to disable that. I don't think there is unless a firmware update comes out. After the monitor is turned on, you do have some RGB options here, and those can be turned off. There's a kind of a scroll wheel on the bottom side of the monitor that allows you to cycle through the different colors that you see here. And you can also dim those lights, or you can turn it completely off by holding in that scroll wheel for about 3 seconds. It'll turn it off. And if you do that again, it'll turn it back on. Now, in a pretty well-lit room, I would say this is what that power-up cycle is going to look like. And keep in mind that backlight bleed or IPS glow, again, is enhanced by the video camera. It's not too bad. But there you see cast against the wall what that looks like. Now, if you want to know the names of those different colors, here they are. We've got kind of a white one here, a peaceful, which is kind of like the rainbow or the dynamic one, but it doesn't move like you see there. We also have a red and a fuchsia. And then you also have like this teal color, which is the one I'm going to use for the most part in this video. Now let's take a look at how this monitor appears on a PS5. You'll see that everything is available to us. So we've got HDCP turned off. I've turned that off manually, but HDR supported in both frequencies when it's on and off up to 120 Hertz in 422. Now, as we turn our attention to the Xbox, you're going to see that everything is supported up to 10-bit color. And again, everything's going to be supported with the exception of Dolby Vision. Now, here's the only PC info I'm going to give you, because really I'm using this with my PS5 and Xbox Series X. My PC kind of can't handle this 4K monitor. And you'll see what is that I'm showing you. Well, basically that is the 4K monitor on the left, my 1440 on the right. And I could never get them to match even when I adjusted the resolution of the 4K monitor. So it's probably a settings thing, but I wanted to show it anyways. Here is the software that you can install on your PC so that you don't have to kind of use those manual dials on your monitor. This will allow you to adjust all of the different settings. You can switch to what they call the classic UI if you don't want that gamer kind of dark look. You can adjust the different screen layouts, the monitor settings, and everything else that you need directly from the software. And of course, if you want to switch back to the gamer UI, you can do that here as well. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the settings of the monitor up close. And we're first going to look at them when you have HDR turned on, because certain things are unlocked and locked with HDR on and off. When it's on, you'll see different game modes available. The first one, Gamer 1, is certified. You can also cycle through to Gamer 2, FPS, RTS, Vivid as well. And from there, your options are rather limited. When you go into Game Adjust, you can change the FreeSync Premium Pro from off to basic to extended. Your response time can go from off to fastest. And then you've got some settings to allow you to turn on things like a crosshair and a FPS counter and whatnot. Picture Adjust, you can adjust your brightness, you can adjust your sharpness, and you can also, as we scroll down, adjust local dimming, which is really more of side dimming. And that's for the most part all you're going to have here under Picture Adjust. Now, it's also worth mentioning this monitor does not auto select inputs. So if you are using both HDMI 2.1 inputs as well as DisplayPort, you will need to manually select the input. And it's kind of a bummer, but it is what it is, and it's worth calling out. When you want to change your game mode, there is a shortcut for that. So you can select from 4 different game modes here, and you just cycle through to choose the one. And then if you want to power off the monitor, that's also going to be done by either holding down the button, or you can go into your menu and go to where it says power off. Now with HDR turned off, it's a little bit different. We've got some other settings. So Gamer 1, you've got Gamer 2, we also have FPS, you've got RTS, Vivid, and we also have a reader option here, easy on the eyes, HDR effect, sRGB, and then if you're a professional calibrator, you can go into calibration 1 and 2 if you've got the appropriate software. I don't, so I can't show you that. Later on in this video, I'm going to walk through RTS and FPS game mode and things like that briefly, but we're really going to sync on, I would say, what is my favorite, and that's sRGB. Now, under Game Adjust, FreeSync Premium Pro, you can adjust that. You can go into the black stabilizer and adjust this one in increments of 5. So you can make those black images appear better. I do find that utilizing this tends to wash the picture out a little bit though, so use it sparingly or cautiously. Your response time, I usually leave it on fast. When you go to faster, you might see some blurring. Here's our FPS counter and crosshair, and like I say, for the video here, I'm going to turn on the FPS counter. You'll see that in the upper left-hand corner of the screen. We can address brightness. You can also go in and adjust your contrast, and these are all in increments of 1. You can go in and adjust the sharpness if you wanted to do that as well, and that's in increments of 10. Your gamma can be adjusted from mode 1, 2, 3, and 4. Our color temps are custom. We've got warm, medium, cool, and then you can go into manual, which is basically going to step it up and down. The W means warm, and you can cycle through those different options. And then as you see on the opposite side, we've got C for cool, and you can go that all the way up to C10. We've got 6 colors, so if you want to get into the individual colors, you can adjust red hue, saturation, same with green, blue. You've got cyan here, magenta, as well as yellow. You can change the black level from low to high. And again, this is similar to what I spoke about before. Doing this will make it so that you can see images and darker scenes better, but in my opinion, at the cost of some of the vividness of the screen. It washes us out a little bit. DFC is automatic brightness adjust. I usually leave that on off, but you can turn it on if you want. And of course, you can reset your picture settings as well. On the input side, you can manually change your inputs here. And then for your aspect ratio, I set this to original, but you do have full wide and then just scan. That might be a PC thing only because I couldn't change that on my consoles. When we go into general, you've got Waves Max audio for the port on the back of the monitor. If you're not using headphones and you're using speakers, then change it to off. You can change your language here. You can choose your user-defined shortcut key 1 and 2 based upon the different options that you're going to see here. And then I would also call out smart energy saving. If you have that on low or high, that is automatically going to adjust the brightness of your monitor. So I turn that off. You can turn your lighting off when the monitor's powered off. You can turn the power LED on or off. You can put the automatic standby from off to 8 hours. I was not able to unlock HDMI Ultra HD Deep Color. I have no idea what that is, how to unlock it. I've got the appropriate cables. Let me know if you know. Buzzer is the beep that you get from the monitor when you turn it on. You can turn that on or off. On-screen display lock can be turned on or off. And then you'll see here total power on time was 22 hours. I'm actually above 30 now, so a lot of this video was filmed right around the 30-hour mark. And it's also going to give you the current resolution and hertz rating for what that monitor is set to at that time. So listen to this. This is an interesting one. That noise happens when you've got something plugged into the headphone jack, like my speakers right there, and you power off your game. If you don't power off your speakers, I had the Logitech, then you hear that noise. And if I unplug that, the noise goes away. So I don't know if that's a ground loop, if it's something related to my speakers. I don't know. Worth calling out. Listen to this because people wanted to know, does the noise or does the monitor make a fan noise? I certainly don't hear one, and unless you put your ear right up to it, you probably won't hear anything. I'm not even sure if it has a fan in it, but if it does, I cannot hear it. So let's go ahead and turn off HDR for the moment. You're going to see the screen flash. And the reason why I want to do that is I want to show you the black level low and high and just get an idea for what the screen changes to when you choose low versus high here. And I'm just going to show you a few examples of that. And again, this is going to be with HDR off. So now we're going to switch it to low for the black level. I do find that doing so results in a little bit less, call it IPS glow in the corners, but it gets a little bit darker too. So let's go ahead and turn HDR back on, and I want to give you some samples of what HDR content looks like on this monitor for both PS5 as well as the Xbox Series X. And we're going to start with some PS5 footage. Here's the dashboard. Again, remember that kind of backlight that you see in the corners, it is evident, but not as evident as what you're seeing in this video. The video is going to enhance what you're seeing. I would roughly guesstimate maybe by 60%, so you can cut it down a little bit. In a darker room, it's going to be more evident. The closer you sit to it, it's going to be more evident, and even the angle as to where you're sitting will enhance that effect as well. And then here's some Ratchet and Clank with HDR turned on under that certified option of Gamer 1. And what we're going to do here is we're going to turn HDR off and see if you can tell the difference. Because I do find that with HDR on, in brighter scenes it looks fine, but in darker scenes it does tend to, at least to my eyes, kind of wash things out. It just doesn't seem right. So there's HDR off, and you saw it on right before. And then there's an example. You can always go into the system menu of the monitor to see what is currently active. Let's go ahead and take a look at Sea of Thieves. And I like showing darker games for HDR content because that's where you're more likely going to see the monitor potentially struggle. Remember, this is not an OLED panel, but I do find, and I'll go back to it again and say that with HDR on, darker colors, especially black, is going to look a little bit more grayish to me. With HDR off, you get much closer to a darker black than a gray. So we're looking at HDR content on right now within Sea of Thieves. And it's almost like you get a bit of a haze over the screen in the darker scenes like this. I mean, it's definitely, to me, it doesn't feel right. When you step outside, it looks decent, but inside, as you'll see here, it has that almost kind of a washed out look at times. And I know I've said it already, but the big kind of glow that you see in the left corner, the camera is really enhancing that. It is there, but not as bad as what you're seeing. So now take a look at this, because I've just turned off HDR, and you can see already, at least to my eyes, it looks richer. You don't get as much of that washout. Now here is the black level. If we want to cycle between high and low, you can see what that does. Look at the pirate, look at the corners when I do that. And it just seems a lot richer to me. And then there's some outside footage. Now, again, when you're outside and HDR footage is on, things do tend to pop more. But I'll also mention that I found that with HDR on, this monitor almost gets so bright, it almost gives me a headache. So again, everybody's going to be different on that. Your mileage is going to vary. For me, it's a little bit too intense. So I actually play with HDR turned off. And that's what you're seeing here. So now we're going to switch on over to some Call of Duty Cold War. And we've got HDR turned on. And that's the other interesting thing that I want to call out throughout all of this is each game and system handles what appears to be HDR differently. So just because you've adjusted your settings, I found that they may not always be the best settings. And here's Destiny for how you've got your monitor set up. So you're going to need to go into things like the game settings and adjust brightness there, adjust the different levels there. And it's this constant back and forth toying to get it just right. So again, to my point, I just find it a lot easier to turn HDR off. This is HDR on, and within Destiny, it was really weird because certain portions of the screen seem overly saturated or overly bright. Other areas seem really dark. So you can see in this screen, portions of it look really light. Other portions look really dark. And then back to Ratchet and Clank, and this is HDR on, and here we go again. It looks fine, right? So that's the thing about HDR on this monitor is it's really, in my opinion, hit or miss. Some look good, some look great, others look not so good. Let's turn HDR off as we've done here, and I want to cycle through and just, again, show you the difference between the black level of high and low because you can raise the levels here at the sacrifice of deep blacks, but you'll be able to see more in the way of detail if you do that. That's a good example of it right here too. Take a look towards the corner where it says like Demon Souls. When I flip between the high and low, you'll see more detail. And then especially here on Sea of Thieves, take a look at the pirate and you flip between high and low and you'll see what that looks like as well. So just a lot of examples of HDR turned off when you change the black level between high and low and what that's going to look like. I think it's all a personal preference, to be quite honest. What I've kind of settled on here is the sRGB setting of this monitor. And I found that it is really, for me, probably the best setting. And as I mentioned before, you do want to make sure that you go into your game that you're playing and adjust the brightness there as well, because that's kind of the second part of the equation here. You can't just adjust it on the monitor. You're going to have to go into the game itself and do it. And many of the games have those settings, from Destiny to Call of Duty to Ratchet and Clank, whatever it might be. So make sure that you do that. Now, what I want you to see here is on the PlayStation 5, what happens when we switch between 60 frames per second and 120. The PlayStation 5 has a handshake thing where the monitor is going to black out for a few seconds. You will lose audio for a few seconds before it returns, and you're going to see that right now. There it is. And now we're back. So that is what you can expect anytime that the monitor on the PlayStation 5 needs to switch between 120 hertz and 60 hertz. It is going to do that kind of cutout for a few seconds. You're going to lose audio for a few seconds, and then it will come back. And for the remainder of this video, unless I call it out, what you're going to be seeing is gameplay utilizing the sRGB setting under the monitor here. Again, to my eyes, this is the one that I think I've settled on as the best for me. And I've left it at all of its default settings, believe it or not, which includes the brightness of 9. Yeah, 9. Now, just to show you what 60 to 60 looks like. So remember how the screen kind of blanked out as it switched frequencies on the PlayStation 5 from 60 to 120. Obviously, if you don't enable 120 hertz, you're not going to have that handshake thing happen. So as you'll see right here, 60 to 60, we go straight into the game. There is no blank out. There is no drop, nothing like that. It's also worth noting that Xbox Series X handles this differently. So you will not have that issue because, as you'll see later in this video, the Xbox can handle 120 at the dash to 120 within game, and it won't be an issue. So this is PS5 footage that you're seeing right now using sRGB with all of the default settings. And you know, for response time, you know, I'm not a monitor pro, so I can't really give you a full tech breakdown here, but I leave it on fast because what I read within the monitor manual says if you set the response time to fastest, you might see some blurring. And I got to admit, when I switched it to that, I didn't see any blurring, but I just leave it on fast and it seems plenty good for me. I don't see any kind of latency in input or anything like that. And again, with the sRGB setting here, everything looks really good to my eyes. The color saturation, the deeper colors, just everything that you're looking at here looks really nice. Now, totally unrelated, but it is a question that's come up a number of times as people say, well, should I go with this monitor or should I go with the LG, let's say the C1 or the CX OLED TV? And you really can't compare the two. That's not an apples to apple comparison. This is an IPS panel. Those are OLEDs. And I would say for pure picture quality, the OLED will win out every single time. You're going to get the inky blacks. You're not going to get any sort of washout in your picture. But the difference is, I would suppose if you want to be competitive, if you're playing first-person shooters, a smaller screen really becomes a benefit, at least in my opinion. I came from a Sony 65-inch television, and when I switched over to the monitor, which this is only 27 inches, there was a little bit of a period that I needed to adjust to, but I find that it's much easier to track to what's happening on the screen and be a little bit more competitive when you're playing games like Call of Duty or Destiny or things like that. Where this monitor gets a little bit more touchy is with darker games like this game right here, right? Demon's Souls, or Resident Evil, where you get into some of the darker scenes. That's where you really have to be on point with your settings. Otherwise, things start to look washed out. So I venture to say, if you're playing more adventure-style single-player games like that, and you don't mind having a big screen, that might be the better way to go. But if you want something that kind of serves multiple purposes, PC as well as competitive play and things like that. This is a really nice monitor. And I would say, as you're getting a look at some Resident Evil footage here, the only thing for me is the stand is a little plasticky. I have an Alienware ultra-wide monitor as well as an HP Omen, and those stands are all metal and heavy duty, but it's not a deal breaker or anything like that. So just give you a little bit of insight on that, my opinions as well. But here's some Resident Evil for reference. And this is exactly what I was talking about. So here is a really dark scene within Resident Evil, and you can turn those, the black level to high or low, but it's still going to struggle a little bit. Now, again, I've said this multiple times in this video, this is really enhanced by the camera. It does not look as dramatic and as bad as you're seeing here when you're looking at it in person with that heavy glow in the corner. Trust me on that. Cut it down by about 60 to 70%, you'll get an idea of what we're talking about. But it is still there. I mean, if you went side by side with a OLED TV, there's no comparison. So now we're going to switch on over to the Xbox, and I'm going to show you some content utilizing sRGB on the Xbox. And it's always going to be a personal preference thing, right? So color vividness, brightness, darkness, things like that. Just because this works for me doesn't mean it's going to work for you. You might be so inclined to have it set up differently that looks better to your eyes. Again, this is just what I find works for me. And just because a lot of people still play it, why not? Let's go ahead and take a look at some Fortnite. And I'm repeating myself here, but it bears repeating, is that it's really interesting in that each game kind of handles itself a little bit differently. So that's why I encourage you to go into the game settings and adjust brightness and whatever they've got in there as well. This game just tends to pop in its colors with this monitor, and it looks really nice, very responsive to 120 hertz. So you'll see what that looks like here, kind of on a YouTube video, but it gives you a good idea. So now we're going to look at some Cold War footage, a lot of fast action that's going to happen on the screen. Then we'll transition over to some Warzone, and you'll see that as well. Some of the new maps here in Cold War. And as we take a look at this, I want to remind you, if you have questions, feel free to leave them down below. I'm not a monitor expert. I kind of took this from the perspective of somebody who just wanted to pick up a really good monitor for my PS5 and Xbox Series X. But I'm happy to answer as many questions as I possibly can in the comments down below. So that goes a long way. As I can to kind of help you guys out. Also, if you want to do me a favor, be sure while you're watching this video to hit that thumbs up button. If you haven't subscribed already, hit that subscribe button, hit the bell notification to be notified when content goes live. That really helps this channel out, and I definitely appreciate it. So you saw how it handles kind of the transition from light to dark. It works. It works really well. And it's very responsive, and I don't see any input lag or anything like that. And quite frankly, once I've settled in on these settings here, it's been pretty much a joy to play with. And here's some Warzone. So as we get close to rounding out this video, just a couple of final thoughts I would say. And that is the HDR implementation on this monitor, in my opinion, isn't the greatest. I probably won't use it. It gets really, really bright, almost to the point to where it's a bit uncomfortable for me. And that's one of the reasons why I turn it off. But I also turn it off because I find that HDR is just too inconsistent. With some games, it looks fine. With others, it doesn't look good at all. And so I just turn it off. And that's a shame because you should be able to use a feature that you're paying for, right? I don't know if a firmware update will help that in the future or whatnot. There's a couple of other minor annoyances, things like the input selector not automatically switching, and then, of course, that little buzzing noise that I heard from the speaker, but those are pretty minor. From a color representation, it looks fantastic to my eyes, so I have no complaints there. From an IPS glow and a backlight bleed perspective, if you're not used to that, that's going to bug you. It takes some time to get used to, but it's evident on all IPS panels. I have it on my other two monitors as well, and this one is no worse, I would say. And as long as you dial in your settings just right, you'll be fine. So it's really not a big deal. So it really comes down to what you're looking for, right? Do you want 120 hertz at 4K? I kind of feel like that's more of a, venture to say, beta feature right now. Not all games support it. The games that do support it, many of them are going to pop your resolution down, or they're going to reduce some of the details in your games. Again, I'm speaking purely from console perspective. So it's not like you're getting perfect 4K quality at 120 hertz. There are still sacrifices. So you're an early adopter at this point. So you really got to ask yourself, do you have to have the latest and greatest right now when maybe it's not utilized across the board? You know, I don't think you can go wrong with the monitor. I really don't. But I also think it just comes down to really what are your preferences, what are your needs, and where do you want to spend it? You know, does a bigger OLED LG CX make sense, or another brand, or do you want to go out and get this? This is a little bit of future proofing, admittingly so. And I'm pleased with it. No regrets for picking this one up. And I'd recommend it to anybody who's in the market for a good gaming monitor. Just know that you will have a few limitations to it, as I've called out in this video. So I know that this has been a long one, and thank you for hanging in there. It was a bear to make. I've done the best I could, and so hopefully it's been helpful to all of you. Again, if there's something I haven't touched upon and you have questions, leave them down below. I'll certainly do my best to answer those. You just saw, again, how the Xbox handles the transition of 120 to 120 on Destiny, so there is no drop like on the PS5. But yeah, leave comments if you have them down below. Do me a favor, hit that thumbs up button on the way out. It helps this channel. Hit subscribe as well to be notified when more content comes online. And I'll be catching you guys next time. Hope you enjoyed it. Take care.